Shalom and welcome to another edition here on Genesis 49's page. Today's topic is going to be, you guessed it, DNA testing. The truth about DNA testing, because this is being used as a weapon to destroy and remove the validity of our claims as being Israelites or being the holy people, because people will always say, "Oh, you say you Hebrew, take a DNA test," as if you're going to go take a DNA test and it's going to go back to being Hebrew or Israelite. No, they're going to ask you some simple questions. They're going to ask you, what do you identify yourself as? Most of y'all that are viewing my video are going to put black, or if you're Hispanic, you're going to put Hispanic. So once you put your race down and you put your name down, they're going to use that data to determine who you come from. It's all predicted. It's all a game. Haplogroups are predicted. They're not known. They're predicted. Some people say, let's get rid of the guesswork and go to DNA. DNA is guesswork. And I got 3 articles right here, 3 witnesses to put this to bed. Because most of y'all claiming this DNA stuff, y'all don't even know how DNA works. Mitochondrial DNA cannot go all the way back to ancestral times. And we're going to get into the articles. We're going to bring it out. But here's the slogan for this channel. We do not follow vague interpretations. And DNA is a vague interpretation of history and ancestry. Now, one of the articles I'm going to bring out is an example of this with this so-called Native American, right? Being called out and saying that she wasn't a Native American. And she brings out the history about how there is no complete genetic study for the Native Americans. They don't exist when it comes to DNA testing. Only the 5 civilized tribes. So if you don't fall within that cataract of those 5 groups, then you don't exist in the DNA testing. You see the problem and the stupidity behind people saying DNA test, like it's the truth. DNA tests, if you believe in DNA tests, don't tell me nothing about believing in the Most High God, Yahweh. Don't tell me anything about that. Don't talk to me about no Bible. Don't talk to me about what I believe, because guess what? You are in a belief system. A lot of people gravitate to the quote unquote science community, the mainstream scientists, because science just means to know. But the scientist community of America and what's being pushed in our schools, that's pseudo. That's false. That's why Timothy said so falsely called science, because it's not knowledge. Everything they deal with is theories. I'm going to give you an example. The earth is 4.6 billion years old. That's a theory that cannot be proven. There's not one shred of evidence that can prove that the earth is 4.6 billion years old. There's not one shred of evidence that can prove that dinosaurs existed millions of years ago. But there's plenty of evidence that they existed along with man. Frescoes, drawings, burial grounds where human bones and dinosaur bones coexist. Okay? And it's proof that they died rapidly, because you find dinosaurs being buried in mud, fighting each other, meaning something happened rapidly. A world catastrophe took place and buried all of these bones we find in the ground. Because you need water and mud to petrify them and preserve the bones. Because if they die any other way, the bones are going to degenerate and going to be eaten up by bugs and stuff of that nature. It's going to decompose. So in order to preserve it, you need water and mud to petrify the bones. There's no proof in everything that mainstream scientists teach. There's no proof of no Big Bang. But you believe in it. You have all the faith in the world. That is your Messiah. That is your Mashiach, your Meshika. That's who you believe in. And don't even get me started on the off the ship. And I'm heated a little bit today because just watch this comedic thing again. And when you look at the scholarship and the authorship, Israelites tend to quote more black scholars, more indigenous scholars. What do I mean by this? We quote people like J.A. Rogers, you see, We quote brothers like that. We quote J.A. Rogers, Rudolph Windsor. We quote Golden Hunger, the Black Russian, right? We quote people like that. They quote Finkelstein. He's an Edomite. Wallace E. Budge, whatever his name is, Wallace Budge. Okay? Give me a break. All these people have agendas. And here's the thing. It all goes back to theory, which theory just means they don't know if it's real or not, and they have faith that it is. This is the theory, like the Blumenbach theory. And DNA goes back to the Blumenbach theory because he separated us into the whole world into 5 races, and said Africus is nigger, nigger is Africus. We brought that out in the last video. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet. Right? And that all plays into this fake DNA thing, saying that, well, we have the tools to show who's who. Who's naming and labeling these Hoblo groups? You have to ask yourself this. Who came up with the Hoblo group J to represent the quote-unquote Jews? Who came up with that? They named it. The DNA didn't, magically come to life like some kind of Pixar movie and start speaking to the scientists. But nonetheless, let's get into the 3 articles that's going to crush this doctrine. Because a lot of our people that go to SciNet and go on the comment board, they have no knowledge. They don't even know how DNA works. They just hear DNA, then a magical light comes off in their head, Oh, DNA, that's the truth. That's right. Give me a break. The first article we're going to give you is the medicaldaily.com. And I will put all 3 links within the description of the video. So you'll be able to check it out on your own time as well. But we're going to read all 3. So bear with me, family. Medicaldaily.com, DNA ancestry tests are meaningless, your historical genealogy, right? Now, this was published, March 7th, 2013, 6 p.m. by Ashik Siddiqui. Excuse me if I butchered that. All humans share large amounts of DNA, which means individual ancestry tests can't reliably trace your genealogy very far without other evidence. And that's the whole purpose of this video. You have to have ancestral records. Why does that present a problem for many black and indigenous people? The problem is many black and indigenous people have been stolen, taken from their lands, relocated, given English names, or given bastardized names instead of having their ancestral names that will tie them back to the people they come from. All their paperwork, their records have been burned. So it's hard for them to produce a racial ethnic line. Y'all got to come to grips to that. And DNA alone does not tell you who you are. That's why they have to have these other sources and other data to come to a conclusion. If not, they're just giving you a guesstimate. That's all it is. It's not a for sure thing. Genealogy tracking has become big business, with many companies charging up to $300 to trace your DNA to specific historical figures or ethnic groups in the distant past by analyzing ancestry tests. A group of scientists now offers a public warning that their ancestry tests have little scientific backing. Somebody made in the comment, it only costs $250 to get a DNA test, and here you is talking about a Bible. But the companies themselves are telling you. They give a public warning that these ancestry tests have little scientific backing and are often so unreliable and inaccurate that they amount to genetic astrology. Though advertisements for some ancestry testing companies give the impression, keyword impression, because they have to follow the legal lead so they don't get sued. So they give the impression that your unique DNA genealogy can tell you a specific story about your ancestry. I'm gonna give you a prime example of that. When you go buy like an air freshener or something or a hand soap, it says it'll guaranteed to kill 99.9% of germs. Why can't it say 100%? It can't say 100% because they know that will be a lie, but they have to make it seem as the They can make the product look as best as they can sell it, so you can pick it up off the shelf. Same thing with these DNA tests. They have to make it seem like it can do what you want it to do without saying that it can do what you want it to do. Because they will get sued. They have to, the legalities and everything has to line up when they're putting these products out there to the public. It says, unique DNA genealogy can tell you a specific story about your ancestry. The scientists say that the same history you get could be given to thousands of other people with a similar ethnic background, and that any number of different possible interpretations could come from your DNA results. So what does that tell you? DNA is not accurate. It's not a magic pill that you take and then boom, you know exactly where you come from. Again, let's keep reading. Your DNA contains an enormous amount of genetic information. And before I continue on this article, 96% of it can't even be decoded. It can't even be read. They call it junk DNA. So how the hell are you going to rely on something that's incomplete? But you want me to put down my Bible, our customs, and our ancestral ties to follow something that's incomplete, that's a guesstimate. 81 books, and that's all I got to say on that. Let's see. Your DNA contains an enormous amount of genetic information, but most information that can be gleaned from it. Oh, wait. Did I skip? Oh, here it is. Professor David Balding and Mark Thomas of the University College London warned in public statement from a Sense About Science campaign group that you cannot look at DNA and read it like a book or a map of a journey without supporting historical evidence. And this is why I love looking into other countries and what they teach, because under the American guise and under the American subterfuge, they hide everything. They don't want you to see it. That's why they tell you the best news is to watch world news, because, you know, when you watch news within the American guidelines, then they're going to cover up everything. But when you watch it on the outside, then you can see everything that they're hiding from the laity. Same thing, man. Same thing with this DNA crap. You look into the University College of London, and he basically tells you cannot look at DNA and read it like a book. But you know where you can read your history? The same book that you keep neglecting. The same book you keep turning away from. Not just in this age. All through time, all through the different epochs, through the Middle Ages, during the time of Christ, the BC period, when we were in Egypt, you kept neglecting Torah. Over and over again. So, and here we are again. History repeats itself. So he said you cannot look at DNA and read it like a book or map of a journey without supporting historical evidence. Like, you have to have the records to go with it. Your DNA contains an enormous amount of genetic information, but most of the information that can be gleaned from it is about the genetic history of the whole population, not of individual family trees. So you can't pick, one person can't say, okay, I'm about to go take a DNA test and find out who I come from. I'm going to know what tribe I come from. I'm going to know what people would like. No, it doesn't work that way. So I'm from the tribe of Issachar. I can't go get a DNA test and say, hey, I'm from the tribe of Issachar. Show me my results, and expect it to say I come from the tribe of Issachar, or I actually descend from the man named Jashub or Yashub that descends from the patriarch Issachar. That doesn't work that way. Okay, let's read on. DNA is an assortment of genetic sequences that have been inherited from many different ancestors. You double your number of ancestors with every generation, because everyone has two parents going back only 10 generations between 200 and 300 years in your genealogy. You have 1,024 ancestors. And you want to claim that you can pinpoint a people and a tribe? That comprises of a lot of people. Okay, going back far enough, each of us has more ancestors than we have sections of DNA, which means that there are many ancestors from whom we have inherited no DNA, and that ultimately there will be many sequences of DNA that most people share. On a long trudge through history, two parents, four great-grandparents, and so on, very soon everyone runs out of ancestors and has to share them, said Steve Jones, emeritus professor of human genetics at UCL. And we're going to pull up that UCL document as well, because they're very honest with the scholarship and the knowledge of genetic studies. If an ancestry test tells you that you are genetically related to someone who lived more than 700 years ago, it may be true about your genealogy, but not in a meaningful way. There are several types of ancestry tests, all which use DNA samples taken from easily accessible parts of the body, like saliva or cheek swab sample. The individual genetic data is compared to the DNA of people for whom is specific information about ethnicity and geographical location. And different ancestry tests look at different types of DNA. Y chromosome DNA, which is inherited along the male line and only found in men. Mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited along the female line, found in both men and women. Autosomal DNA, and I might butcher that, which can come from any ancestor and makes up 98% of your DNA. Each of us have just only one ancestral lineage for mtDNA, and each man has just one for Y chromosome DNA. Each type of DNA is passed down through generations as an individual unit. Autosomal DNA, however, is made up of thousands of sections of DNA, each with its own history. Since all humans share the large majority of our DNA through far removed common ancestors, each of us has very little DNA that is directly inherited from a specific ancestor, even one who lived only a few generations ago. The more steps you take up the family tree, the more negligible the DNA connections get compared to the enormous amount we all share, and the less ancestry tests can reliably reveal. So this is not a reliable tool to dig into the ancestral archives to know who you come from. That's false. Pseudo. Fake, fallacious. How many words you need to describe this? Do I need more adjectives? Until you brothers get it, you brothers and sisters get it, do your thick skull. Even genetic connections to historical ethnic groups like Viking or Zulu are vague. Let me read that again. Even genetic connections to historical ethnic groups like Vikings, people going around saying, oh, I descend from the Vikings, or Zulu, are vague because you can't really draw a clear line of connection to those people. It's a guesstimate. People's genetics do not reflect specific groups. Let me say that again. People's genetics do not reflect specific groups, since the high degree of genetic mixing over centuries means that even cultures with strong cultural boundaries do not have noticeable genetic differences. And this makes complete sense, because when you follow the biblical narrative, we all come from Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, which equals up to 8 people. Now you have incomplete penetrance and you have chimerism that will make all nations look different. But at the same time, genomes and phenotype don't necessarily always have to agree with each other to exist. But you guys don't study and read this. You just believe it. You are the scientific Christians. You just believe it. You got faith. You guys, I admire y'all faith. Y'all have strong faith in this bullshit. And then you have these people writing all these articles on Medical Daily, UCL, these different colleges in London, bringing out the truth about it. Let's read on. And that's why the scripture says their tongue should fall on themselves. Their own people are going to tell on them. Okay? And guess what? People like us, Genesis 49ers, we're going to come out, reveal it, and do a show on it. Then all y'all going to have egg on your face, man. It's time to come back to your true nationality. You are the Israelites that the Bible speaks of. We know that from the biblical record, ancestral archives, and the prophecy. How about that? People descended from more isolated populations like the Scottish Highlands in the United Kingdom have minor genetic differences from the general surrounding population, but they are not significant enough to identify a Scottish gene in an individual's genealogy. As a result, almost every Briton is the descendant of Viking hordes, Roman legions, African migrants, Indian Brahims, or anyone else that they fancy, said Jones, because it's all in that gene pool. It's all a mixture. If an ancestry test finds a connection between a particular sequence of your DNA and a specific isolated tribal group, the only thing that can be concluded is a mere possibility that some of your ancestors were in that group. Human history involves an incredible amount of migration, and because each of your genes has its own ancestral history, there are thousands of possible versions of your genealogy. So, is there any reliable information about your genealogy in distant past that can come from DNA ancestry companies? To answer a specific question about individual ancestry, you need to supplement your mitochondrial DNA or Y chromosome genetic information with reliable historical records. Like I brought up about the Amazonian Jews, right? Those Jews not only would take a DNA test, the only thing they did, they would show the gravestone where their grandfather died with his Hebrew name, okay, his records, okay, his papers, okay. They would show all these things and say, this is my grandfather, this is how I descend from. That's how they knew who they were. Not by some magical testing lab that can make DNA talk to you. And that's another thing. People talking about the oldest bones are found in Africa. Bones don't tell you how old they are. They don't. Carbon dating is false. It's too sporadic. Anybody that's honest and objective will come to that conclusion. It's too sporadic. Bones don't tell you anything but this is where these bones were buried at. It don't even tell you where they died at. So anyway, yeah, you guys have a lot of faith, man. You guys have an faith of what they say, faith of a mustard seed. Y'all got the whole tree already, cause y'all believe in this stuff, man. Y'all believe anything that has the word #science on it. Then you're gonna eat it all up, cause you think it's truth. In your mind, science means truth. Human history involves an incredible amount of migration, and because of each of your genes has its own ancestral history, there are thousands of possible versions of your genealogy. That's why you had that one woman that went to one of those DNA places. I think Fox News did a story on it, and she went to 4 different places, and they gave her 4 different answers, because you can come up with thousands and thousands of genealogical traits, versions of your genealogy. So is there any reliable information about your genealogy in distant past that can come from a DNA ancestry companies? To answer a specific question about an individual ancestry, you need to supplement your mitochondrial DNA or Y chromosome genetic information with reliable historical records. It's possible, for example, for 2 men who find historical records indicating a common male, line ancestor 400 years ago, to have their Y chromosome DNA analyzed to test their genealogy. Some ancestry testing companies can do this reliably. With advanced testing, you can provide a general ancestry indication, Northern European, Western Africa, or Middle Eastern, in some cases even more specific, said David Nicholson, director of the DNA Worldwide Group of BBC News. DNA cannot tell you that your ancestors were Viking. Simply that your ancestry came from a part of the world common to the Vikings based on the historic facts. It is important to talk to the company who provide the testing to make sure your expectations are realistic. Again, you can't tie it to a particular people. In general, however, DNA genealogy is far more useful for population geneticists who are trying to learn about past human migration than it is for individuals trying to learn their specific relation to Genghis Khan. By analyzing the DNA variations among many individuals from different regions, scientists can test possible population history models and calculate how likely they are to explain specific DNA patterns. This can tell us about populations of people, but not much about individual genealogy. Genetic researchers are telling us that you are better off digging around in your loft than doing a DNA ancestry test if you want to find out more about your family tree, said Tracy Brown, director of Sense About Science, to the Telegraph. So these people are coming out and telling the truth about this DNA testing. It's really just been a money grab for these companies, right? And I know this video is going to be long, but just bear with me, brothers. Bear with me, family. The last one was long, but we got a lot of ground to cover. So we're going to the UCL.ac.uk Mace Lab Debunking and Understanding Ancestry Testing. So Like I said, I'm going to put 3 links in the description of the video so you guys can check these web pages out on your own. Now, understanding genetic ancestry testing. Genetic ancestry testing is the use of DNA information to make inference about someone's deep ancestry. Hundreds of thousands of years into the past, genetic genealogy, on the other hand, combines DNA testing with genealogical and historical records, and typically make use of large databases to identify matches or direct comparisons to test for expected matches. There is some overlap between the two, but genetic genealogy is generally more reliable because of its use of additional information. The information about your ancestry available from DNA alone is limited. The information about your ancestry available from DNA alone is limited, as we try to explain here. Now, as you can see, this web page is being honest, and that's what our people need to see. Aside of all of this, when you go to Black News, Sunday, and all that, they big up DNA testing like it's the best thing since sliced bread. They think it's the truth. That's like a deity to them. That's like their DNA testing is like a deity to them. They pay reverence and homage to DNA testing. But these people will tell you without records or anything, you can't really come to a conclusion. And we know the disparity of records with our people because of slavery, the mass genocide, and all of the things they did to us, burning our records. So let's get into the types of testing so you can understand, the viewer, the laity, the people who are watching, the brother or sister that's watching, so you can understand each DNA test available. So we got the Y chromosome DNA test we're going to cover first. It says a Y chromosome DNA test provides information about your male line ancestry only, which in most cultures corresponds with the inheritance of surnames. Only males carry a Y chromosome, but a female can learn about her father line. For example, though her father or brother among the tests currently available, there is much variety in the amount of information provided. The markers tested are of two types: STR, short tandem repeats, and SNP, single nucleotide polymorphisms. These markers have different mutation rates and so give information at different time depths. The information you receive depends on which and how many markers of each type are tested. SNP testing is used for deep ancestry purposes to provide information about your haplogroup, which tells you which branch of the Y-DNA tree you belong to. YSTR tests are used for genetic genealogy purposes within surname project to test hypotheses about patrilineal relationships and to investigate questions about surname origins. So you see that it has to have additional information. It has to give you your surname. So guess what? If a black man wanted to take this, right? Let's say his last name is Roberts. His last name is Roberts, and he takes his DNA test, and his last name is Roberts, right? He gives him his surname. I want to know where my surname comes from. Well, here it is right here, 1850. This slave owner, his name was Roberts, and the slaves took his last name. So this would be very inaccurate for our people. You understand that? It's already an inaccurate test in itself, but when you look at the particulars that go into doing these tests and performing it, you can clearly see this doesn't work for indigenous and quote-unquote black people. It says these tests also provide very limited information about your deep ancestry by giving you a predicted haplogroup assignment. How do they give you the predicted haplogroup assignment? By asking you, what is your name? What's your first name? What's your last name? What ethnic background do you choose to be? Right? You might put down African. Okay, you might put Hispanic. And then by that information that you give them, they determine what the hell you are. Oh, you West African? Oh, you E1, B1A, E1, B1B? Oh, you European? Oh, you type J. Oh, you Polynesian. Because it all go back to that Blumenbach crap with the 5 races. Still stuck in that paradigm. Let's keep going. If two people have the same Y-DNA haplogroup, it means they usually share a common patrilineal ancestor more recently than two people from different haplogroups. But the common ancestor may still have been a long time ago. That time can be estimated, but such estimates are not precise with current standard tests. Although comprehensive sequencing of the Y chromosome is becoming available and will give improved precision. The haplogroup information is often accompanied by a story about the origin of your ancestors. Here you go. You have to have a story, including a map of the world with arrows indicating ancestral migrations. Hundreds of thousands of men from around the world have now had their Y-DNA tested, and we have a very good idea of distribution of different haplogroups in present-day population. Again, keyword, present-day population. This doesn't deal with ancestral ties. It is, however, difficult to be confident about where these haplogroups originated and how they spread. Many different histories could explain their current distribution. So when you hear the Igbos give their oral story about them coming from Israel, whether it be 70 AD story or the one after the Assyrian dispersion, why are you doubting them? That was passed down from their forefathers. But you will say, oh, they need to take a DNA test. Oh, it's E1, B18. They're African. When only DNA can do is put you in a haplogroup that's predicted for this time that we live in today. It doesn't go back thousands of years. Our people are easily persuaded, man. They're easily dazzled by this false pseudoscience. But here, this London website is going to give you the truth. So I'm just reading it from the page. I'm going to read it again. It is, however, difficult to be confident about where these haplogroups originated and how they spread. Many different histories could explain their current distribution. Sometimes a company will associate a haplogroup with, for example, Viking, Norman, or Saxon ancestry. But such associations are at best speculative and should be treated with caution. Just as today, most haplogroups are shared among many populations. So would it have been for past populations? Furthermore, those past populations would have been genetically diverse and different from the modern populations in their regions of origin. The father line is just one lineage in your family tree, and as you go farther back in time, it represents a rapidly diminishing proportion of your total ancestry. For example, you have 64 great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, and a man shares his Y chromosome with just one of these 64 ancestors. Now, that was the Y-DNA test, and it went over the flaws in it and how it can't be used as a precise tool. You got to have other evidences besides DNA. DNA is not some kind of magical thing you take and it just tells you it's not a crystal ball you look in and it tells you your past, your fortune, and stuff like that. Let's go to the mitochondrial DNA test, which comes from the woman, right? It says mitochondrial DNA tests provide information about your female line ancestry only. Mitochondrial DNA is passed on by a mother to her male and female children, but only females can pass their mitochondrial DNA on to the next generation. Males are dead ends for mtDNA. This test, like the Y-DNA test, provides information about one specific lineage. Your mother, your mother's mother, your mother's mother, and so on back in time. Again, the amount of information provided varies among tests, but the mitochondrial DNA sequence is short, just 16,569 DNA letters. And so sequencing the whole mitochondrial DNA genome is already not very expensive. And mitochondrial DNA tests can be used for genealogical purposes to test a hypothesis. Remember, they keep using this word hypothesis. A hypothesis is a guess, a hypothesis, superimposed guess, man, about recent female line ancestry, perhaps arising from genealogical research, or to look for matches in genetic genealogical database. The mitochondrial DNA test also provides a haplogroup assignment, which may, like the Y-DNA haplogroup, be accompanied by a story and perhaps a migration map. We know a lot about the present-day distribution of the mitochondrial DNA haplogroups, but it is again much more difficult to make inferences about the more distant past. So what we're proving this whole time reading this article is that you can't go deep into history and pick out who you are with these DNA tests. The mitochondrial DNA mutation rate is relatively high, although there is considerable uncertainty about the precise rate. The probability of a mutation occurring in the whole mitochondrial DNA genome in one generation, i.e. transmission from mother to child, is estimated at between 1 to 3%. Therefore, the time gap between mutations in a mitochondrial DNA sequence can be 100 generations or more. And so common mitochondrial DNA ancestors cannot be dated accurately even with full mitochondrial DNA genome data. It cannot be dated accurately. So how are they going to come with that mitochondrial DNA theory that all people come from this one woman? That's a theory, by the way. And mitochondrial DNA does not work that way. It cannot be dated accurately even with the full mitochondrial DNA genome data. If you share a full mitochondrial DNA sequence with someone, the common matrilineal ancestor could be 1 or 50 generations ago. For example, it is common for a participant in genetic genealogy databases to have exact full sequencing matches with people with ancestry from a number of different countries. As with the Y chromosome, as you go further back in time, your mitochondrial DNA represents a rapidly diminishing proportion of your total ancestry. It goes back to the same thing. This is not accurate. It can't tell you, it's not a reliable source to tell you anything about ancestry. Okay, now let's go to autosomal DNA test. An autosomal DNA test provides information from the great majority of your DNA. The autosomes are the chromosomes other than X, the X, Y, and mitochondrial DNA. It contains most of the DNA sequences and genes. Although full genome sequencing is not far away, it remains unaffordable for most, and autosomal DNA tests usually examine up to around 1 million genetic markers, SNPs, spread across the genome. 1 million may sound a lot, but there are over 3 billion DNA letters in the human genome, so it's still a small fraction, but the most informative sites are chosen. The markers give information about all your ancestors in recent generations, but once you go beyond about 10 generations back into the past, roughly 300 years, only a small fraction of your ancestors have contributed directly to your DNA. So even if William Shakespeare were your ancestor born 450 years ago, you almost certainly inherit no DNA from him. This can be a bit confusing. You did inherit almost all your DNA from ancestors alive at that time, but there are very many of them. Perhaps 10,000 or more, and you only actually inherit your DNA from a few hundred of them, a small fraction. The others are pedigree ancestors, but not DNA ancestors. You could have inherited DNA from them, but did not because of the randomness and the 50% transmission of DNA from parent to child, because you lose 50%, from descent once you have a child. The uniparental Y and mtDNA are exceptions. You inherit them from all your patrilineal and matrilineal ancestors respectively, the former only if you are male. And so in a sense, they can provide a link with very remote ancestors, but they represent only a small fraction of your ancestry and allow only a limited inference about time depth. And to infer something is guessing too. Autosomal DNA tests can be used to identify individuals on whom you share one or more common ancestors up to a handful of generations in the past. This is done by looking at large chunks of DNA that you both share, indicating recent shared inheritance. Sometimes it happens that a large chunk of DNA is conserved in two individuals from common ancestors more than 10 generations in the past. But this is rare. The great majority of common ancestors at the time depth will not be identified from DNA of their descendants today. Although sharing one or more large chunks of DNA makes it almost certain that two of you had at least one recent common ancestor, dating the ancestors is imprecise, particularly beyond about 4 generations ago. Also, the test has no ability to distinguish certain relationships. For example, using DNA alone, a half-sibling relationship cannot be distinguished from the grandparent-grandchild relationship. In the latter case, we can't tell from the DNA which is the grandparent and which is the grandchild. Algorithms that predict specific relationships are rarely precise beyond first degree, but they can identify more distant relationships approximately with good accuracy out to about the second cousin. And the precise relationship may then be confirmed using additional information. You still need to have outside sources to do this. So it's looking grim for this DNA stuff. It just gets worse and worse the more you learn about it. It's not reliable. Autosomal tests also provide information about individuals' ethnicity by identifying sections of the DNA that best match reference databases of modern population with geographical or ethnic labels. Again, it's going to the modern population because it can't deal with the ancestral ones. Ethnicity tests are better called biogeographical ancestry tests of admixture tests. Your ethnicity is a social category that may not accurately reflect your ancestry. Let me read that again. Your ethnicity is a social category. And what do these social categories start? With Blumenbach and his theory, in his 5 race theory. The Malay people, the Africans are the black, the Caucasians are the white, the Asians are the yellow. Yeah, him. The American Indians are the red. I'm going to read it again. Your ethnicity is a social category that may not accurately reflect your ancestry. However, the reference populations used for comparison purposes are limited. The ethnic labels applied to them may be questionable, and they were collected in different ways for different purposes. They rarely represent true random samples from a population because the population itself may not be precisely defined. Populations usually overlap and blend with other populations. You see how honest this website's being? Do you see how honest this website's being? And I apologize. I should have had this blown all the way up. Distinguishing between populations within continents is often poor with the current resolution of markers in databases. Human genetic variation usually varies smoothly with geographical distance. As you travel from Dakar to Vladivostok, and that was some kind of Russian, I butchered it, you can observe continual change in gene variant frequencies. There's a big genetic difference between start and end cities, but there are no sharp genetic boundaries along the way. Ethnic geographical assignments have some validity at large scale. For example, in Latin America, it usually is possible to distinguish with confidence sections in the individual genome that are sub-Saharan African, European, Native American origin. However, and you always got to get the however, that's like the but. Testing companies will often assign national labels to genetic clusters whereas gene variant frequencies tend to change smoothly across borders. Thus, French people may be assigned a large percentage of British ancestry. Normandy and Kent are genetically similar, as you would expect from history and geography. So it's not easy to distinguish English from French based on DNA alone. Again, DNA is not some kind of magical crystal ball. That's going to give you insight to the ancestors. Given high quality genomic databases, it would be possible to assign an individual to a region of an origin with a reasonable degree of accuracy, human privacy, but this is beyond what genetic testing companies currently have available, both in terms of having enough genetic markers in large and well annotated databases. As a result of the random inheritance of DNA, close relatives can often be assigned markedly different ethnicity percentages. This may be correct. For example, if you have 3 grandparents from Africa and 1 from Asia, you and your brother and sister may receive very different proportions of Asian DNA, even though you share the same parents. However, such differences may also reflect inadequacies in the database used. Why? Because this stuff is inaccurate, it's not reliable. That's the conclusion. Or the methods are inference applied. The inference applied. It is also common to find that people get very different percentages from different testing companies. This is partly because each company uses different databases and the individuals within them are categorized in different ways. There is no correct way to categorize human beings. Each company also uses its own algorithm to make the estimates, and the target time depth varies from company to company, but it's often not explicitly stated. The estimates will also change over time as additional references, populations are added, and as the algorithms are adjusted or improved. So this is not an exact science. This is a guesstimate. This is nothing but DNA is nothing but guesswork. That should be the title of the video. DNA is guesswork. It's not an accurate edifice to pinpoint ancestors and find out who you are. It's not. And everybody pushing that, you are misleading not only yourself, you're misleading your family and the community. Now, the final one, and again, family, Genesis 49ers, we say no to vague interpretations, and DNA testing is vague. So, I'm going to put the 3 links that I dealt with. I dealt with 2 already, the UCL one and the medical daily one, and the final one, slate.com. And I'm going to put them in the description. So if you want to share it or you want to bring it out on your own time or read it and study material, you can. So let's get into the last one on slate.com. The articles dealing with DNA testing cannot determine ancestry, including Elizabeth Warren. Let's get into it. This is by Matt Miller. June 29, 2016. I remember when this was going on in the news. So let's just read it. It says, Scott Brown, the former Massachusetts senator who lost to Elizabeth Warren in the 2012 election, has decided to dredge up old accusations that may have ultimately cost him that race. As you know, she's not Native American, Brown told reporters this week. She's not 132. She's not of Cherokee. He then called on Harvard University, where Warren was a law professor, to release records that allegedly indicate Warren's benefited from affirmative action. There's no reason to believe that this is true. Before suggesting that, she could take a DNA test if she wants to prove her roots. But here's the thing. DNA testing cannot definitely prove whether a person is Cherokee or a member of any community, at least not reliably. To assume it can is to assume that there's something inherently different in genetic makeup of tribal members and that this thing is universal within that community. That's not true. Our genes dictate certain things about us. There's a gene that programs the color of your eyes, for example, but ethnicity is not a trait derived from a single gene, because ethnicity is mostly our perception of a collection of traits rather than a trait itself. So a genetic test that looks at our genes and comes back with an assessment of our ethnic roots isn't honing in on a specific gene and reading what it says, because there's no such gene to read. Instead, the test is comparing snippets of our DNA to snippets of DNA of people of known origin and looking for similarities. The problem is that DNA snippets or markers are inconsistent. Sometimes they are passed on, sometimes they are not. And whether they are or aren't is random. Such a large percentage of Native Americans may share certain genetic markers, but many Native Americans may lack the same marker, and many non-Native Americans may carry it by coincidence. So when a DNA test comes back saying you are 28% Finnish, all it's really saying is that of the DNA analyzed, most companies don't analyze all your DNA. 28% of it was most similar to that of a completely Finnish person. In the end, these comparisons are a fun but ultimately unreliable way to think about the possibilities of whom your ancestors might have been, rather than definitive proof of your ethnic background. So we all of this get better as we get more sophisticated genetic tests, or could better genetic tests help amass more data that would improve the precision of these tests? Probably not. In fact, it might get more complicated. Scientists who don't know better claim that when more natives are sampled, they'll have better databases, i.e. more native markers, says Kim Tallbetter, professor of native studies at the University of Alberta, and 47-tweet takedown of Brown's remark about Warren. Geneticists think that when more markers and greater historical genetic resolution, they'll be able to pinpoint tri-specific markers. But this does not account for the fact that people are continuously moving and reproducing with each other. Diverse people. They mix their genetic code with other communities. They mix their genetic codes with other communities, as they always have, going back to the dawn of our species. If anything, our DNA is getting more muddled, not more clear. Still, the past 10 years have seen the idea of DNA testing go from prohibitively expensive to a $99 ready-to-mail cotton swab. Ancestry.com plasters its homepage with pie charts that promise to give you sense of identity with decimal point precision. Global sales of these kits are expected to reach $60 billion in the next 4 years. That is ridiculous. The skyrocketing estimate is due to the part in the popularity of PBS show Finding Your Roots, which pairs DNA analysts with paper trail chasing to reconstruct guest genealogy. The idea of tracing one's root resonates particularly with black Americans, as NPR's All Things Considered highlighted earlier this year, because this group particularly lacking in genealogical information due to the forced migration of slavery. Many people talk to me about living their whole lives wanting to know who they were, and since they in the sense of who they were before the slave trade. And I'm going to give them the answer. You the Hebrew Israelites that the Bible speaks of. And we know that through prophecy, and we know that through the Igbos, Yorubas, by their own admission, by their own oral stories, by what they teach. All right, we know that. We don't got to go to no laboratory to do it. The Liongo tribe, okay? The Moroccan Jews, Ismail Dia he has the records that go back to the 1500s of the Jewish caravan of the Albana family that came from Spain. You can't beat that. You can't beat what's written on paper, what was passed down from his forefathers. I get passionate about this because you got so many idiots out here pushing this pseudoscience. And you got our people really wanting to know who they are. And we have the answers. We have the keys. We're going to give it to them as well. Keep following Genesis 49ers. We're going to bring forth the proof, the documentation, and the scholarship. Columbia sociology professor Alondra Nelson said to NPR, and that was many people talk to me about living their whole lives wanting to know who we are in the sense of who they were before the slave trade. Unfortunately, the problems posed by the test apply just as much to this community as they do to Warren, meaning the black and the Native American. Another issue is limited and inconsistent data. Ancestry.com, for example, divides the world up into 26 genetic regions and uses just 115 samples to create the representative of each region. A very, very small sample size, and different companies place different weight on these samples, which come from burial grounds, minor isolated communities, and academically published data like the Human Genome Diversity Project. For the consumer, this means if you don't like your heritage results, try a different company. You'll get a completely different breakdown. Whether there are any harm in people basing their identity on faulty reasoning is unclear. And again, he called it faulty reasoning. But the success of these commercial endeavors proves that at the very least, consumers find it kind of fun. Genetic testing is basically just a low-cost way to get a blurry picture on whom your ancestors might have been related to. Just don't take that picture too seriously. And that's the message from Genesis 49 as well. Stop taking DNA so serious. It's not even reliable. It's a bunch of conjecture. It's a bunch of inferring and a bunch of guessing you have to do. We've read the articles. We've read it. Three witnesses. It's time to come to the verdict. We're going to claim that pseudo. The court of Genesis 49ers calls the DNA testing pseudo, and it's not reliable. That is the conclusion of the court. Oh man, should it be a sentencing? You know, maybe they should get 100 years. Maybe they should get 25 to life, 3 consecutive, with no chance of parole. I'm having fun with this, brothers. Hey, man, like the video, comment down below if you agree or disagree. Share the video on the multitude of social platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Spread the news about Genesis 49ers. We're bringing you the information. We're bringing you the sources. We're showing you exactly where we're getting this from. And we pray that this is enlightening and it's giving you understanding and wisdom. I know I've been talking for a long time. It's probably going to be an hour and some change, but this was much needed. I've been wanting to do this. It's been on my mind of tearing down this stronghold that's in our people's mind. Well, I can't be this or that because my haplogroups are predicted and made up. This is not a exact science. Just like carbon dating is not an exact science. All this stuff is not exact science. Everything that you thought that was right and exact about science is false. It's just a blurry picture. So with that, I'm going to say shalom. Peace to all the brothers that are of Israel. If you're not of Israel, you're not of the persuasion, I pray that this may help you come into the persuasion and give you a more clear perception, if you will, or view, if you will, of our culture and what we believe in, and more clear picture on this DNA testing first and foremost. All right, so shalom, shalom to my brothers and sisters that watch. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet. Spread the news about Genesis 49ers. We are here to give the information. Source after source after source. Video after video after video. Genesis 49ers signing off.